In 1943, the following directive was issued from party headquarters to all communists in the United States. It read, "When certain obstructionists become too irritating, label them after suitable build-ups as fascist or Nazi or anti-Semitic, and use the prestige of anti-fascist and tolerance organizations to discredit them. In the public mind, constantly associate those who oppose us with those names which already have a bad smell. The association will, after enough repetition, become fact in the public mind."
Like a virus, divides us, incites us to violence and riots. Our logic is silent, so question the science. Just follow the guidance, completely compliant.
One of the refugees spoke up and he said, "You know, you Americans have funny ideas about life under communism. Apparently you think there's a communist soldier standing on every street corner with a rifle and bayonet to keep the people in line. But this isn't so." He said, "Oh, sure, in the beginning there were plenty of soldiers and executions and deportations to slave labor camps, but we don't see much of that anymore. The open violence lasted only for about a year or a year and a half, and then the anti-communist leadership was liquidated. And now, to the casual observers, there's a great deal of apparent calm and freedom." For instance, he said, "I lived in the largest city in the country. We had a large park there directly across the street from a beautiful church." He said they left one church open, one in the entire country, primarily for guided tours of visiting Americans who had come to see if religion was being persecuted. He said, "Anytime I wanted to, I could have gone into that park, stood on a bench, and spoken out against communism. Then I could have walked across the street into that church and knelt down in prayer, and I wouldn't have been arrested or bothered in any way. But you can be sure I did not do these things, because if I had, the very next day, the wheels of the bureaucracy would have begun to turn, and I would have been informed that my quota of food stamps had been cut, that my allotment for clothing and shoes had been reduced, that my allocation for living quarters had been downgraded, and finally, that my job assignment had been changed from the kind of work for which I'd been trained to menial labor at lower pay. So none of us did any of those things that we were theoretically entitled to do because of the tremendous power that the Communist Party had over our economic existence." And then he said something that I'll never forget. He hesitated for a moment, and weighing his words very carefully so as not to hurt our feelings, he said, "You know, I came to America expecting to find a nation of free men. But instead, I find exactly the same thing. Everywhere I look, I see men and women who know that communists are making headway in this country. They know that something must be done and that someone must stand up to them. But they themselves do nothing. They remain silent because they're afraid that if they speak out or take a stand publicly, it'll be bad for business. They may lose a client. They may even lose their jobs. Or perhaps they're receiving a regular government check and already are too dependent upon some of the very people and programs they know they should oppose." And then he said, "These men voluntarily have gone behind the Iron Curtain. They're already taken over by the communists. The only difference is that for the present at least, they can still get out any time they really want to, and we could not." I think there's a great lesson to be learned from that because it's true, isn't it? There are many men who are physically brave beyond any question when it comes to standing up against a tyranny that threatens with armies. Some of them carry the actual scars of battle to prove it. But when it comes to this new kind of war, they're lost to the fight. When there is no battlefield, when the weapons are not rifles or bombs but economic pressures, then who is your enemy? How do you fight? Where do you begin? It's precisely for these reasons that any modern dictatorship must have control over the economic sphere of all human activity. This was true of Nazism, It was true of fascism, it's true of communism, and it's also true of socialism. Regardless of what name we give it, total government control is by definition totalitarianism. That's what the word means. Now, of course, the minute you begin to think along these lines, you'll become the target of a whole barrage of attacks. You'll be called a witch hunter, a McCarthyite, a right-wing extremist, and other delicate phrases that are well designed to intimidate the average person into silence. If that doesn't work, then you'll be called a fascist, or at least a dictator, because supposedly you want to deny basic constitutional freedoms to a small group of Americans just because they happen to hold political views that are different from yours. How many times have you heard that? And you know, at first it sounds almost convincing. But the argument is a trap. And the bait inside that trap is the hidden assertion that the Communist Party is merely a political party. Now, if it were a political party and that's all, then of course we would have to grant them all the same constitutional rights and immunities as other loyal American citizens. But if the Communist Party is not a political party, if it is in fact a supranational organization dedicated to world conquest, if in addition to political means, it also uses military means, economic means, propaganda means, bribery, blackmail, treason, murder, and any other means that suit its purposes, then its members are not political by nature, are not loyal to the United States, and have no legal or moral claim to constitutional liberties. There's no such thing as absolute freedom. For every liberty, an equal and opposite restraint is required. For example, in order for us to enjoy freedom of speech, it's necessary to deny others the freedom to come in here and break up this meeting. The logic of liberty is that it must stop short of the liberty to destroy itself.
They're teaching people that white children are inherently evil and racist, and their employees just kind of sit there and nod. I mean, is anybody saying, you know, I'm not putting up with this anymore? You can't, if you said this about any other group, it would be unacceptable. Why are you doing this? Has anyone fought back?
You know, from the sources who leaked me this material, they fought back through me by sharing the documents with me so I could expose them to the public. But here's the thing, in corporate America, people are scared for their jobs, they're scared for their reputations, they're scared for their families. This is the new dominant ideology in workplaces and universities and K-12 schools. People are terrified to stand up because they see that Americans who do stand up for the very simple truth that we should all be treated equally, regardless of our skin color, are now treated as enemies of our largest institutions. They'll be held up for mockery, shame, humiliation. And it's up to us to stand up, to speak out, those of us who have a platform, who have power, because this ideology is seeping into our institutions and seeks to subvert and destroy the very foundational values and principles of this great country.
Robert J. Lifton's 8 criteria for thought reform. Number 1, control. This is control of everything going in and out. Everything they hear, see, write, read. Sometimes the control is subtle or overt. Sometimes it's made to seem that the control is necessary in order to protect a person. It can also be a preemptive explanation of what might be said. So if you can't control everything the person is going to hear, then instead they will control the way that the person interprets that information. So in the end, if they're given a warning that might steer them in a different direction, they've already been conditioned to reject
And so
that
we talk about
information.
that as raising authoritative information. But then we also talk about removing information that is problematic. You know, of course, anything that is medically unsubstantiated. So people saying like, take vitamin C.
Facebook is taking. I think it's been an unprecedented effort to help encourage people to get vaccinated, to promote authoritative information about COVID and the vaccines, and to fight and take down misinformation, sharing authoritative information from government officials as well as trusted community leaders. Billions of people have visited it. In terms of fighting misinformation, we've taken down more than 18 million pieces of misinformation.
You know, the numbers you talk about
Crazy.
are
Authoritative information.
Show people authoritative information.
Number 2 on the list is mystical manipulation or planned spontaneity. This can be seen as a sequence of events that seem to have happened naturally, but in fact they were concocted in order to make a person look like they know what they're talking about or that they're gifted. This can legitimize the controller's authority and in turn can cause members to become pawns and unknowingly deceive others with information that they think they know, but they were actually manipulated into believing.
But also there will be a surprise outbreak. And we will definitely get surprised in the next few years.
Today, the greatest risk of global catastrophe, it looks like this. If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Not missiles, but microbes.
Wanted more people in the line because they knew it was scheduled.
Well, we knew they were coming. We had no clue that we were going to have to, like, do fake patients.
Gotcha. Did she tell you guys, like, hey, you're not actually getting tested?
Yeah. Yeah, she did. Well, just to make it look busy for the news because they were right there.
That's crazy. Well, I didn't see you guys do the swab at all. I just saw you talking with them. And then I was talking with the other girl.
There were a couple of real patients, which made it worse. They probably just wanted it to look busy.
Number 3 is the demand for purity. This is a division that's created between the group and the others. So it's us against them, it's black and white, it's good or bad. Also, causing guilt and shame in order to make people act a certain way or agree to do certain things. Once a person starts to feel like the world is black and white, it makes it harder for them to understand the dimensions of human behavior and emotions and feelings and who people are. So when you see somebody as, oh, this is a so-and-so, this is a whatever, a political party that I don't like, I disagree with, they are part of that party. Well, then I hate them without even really knowing who they really are as a person. There's so much more to people.
Children under the age of 10 not to wear them. So why would I never wear them? Why? It's being ridiculous. You're over-ridiculous. You take care of yourself. Bye.
Number 4 is confession. This is often used in a way to humiliate the subject and break them down. It could be seen in the form of the person having to divulge their secrets or having to prove something or provide some kind of private information. It can make that person feel afraid to leave because they don't want that information getting out to the public, or it could actually make the person feel that they've surrendered and make them feel more embedded into the group.
Dine al fresco, but in a few weeks, having a meal indoors at a New York City restaurant will require you show proof of vaccination. This West Village restaurant.
Number 5 on the list is sacred science. A totalist will often use scientific jargon in order to prove a point, and they will label this as fact, unquestionable, undeniable proof. Anyone questioning it is often made to look like a fool and might be described as confused or misled. Sometimes the science will change, and this could be because it was proven wrong, or it could be because a contradictory idea needed to be introduced, and therefore there will be some sort of explanation as to why it has changed. and why the science is suddenly the opposite of what it was before. And there'll be some kind of scientific road that led to this other idea.
I need to wear a face mask. The answer, no. The CDC does not recommend the routine use of face masks
whether it helps to wear a mask. The World Health Organization says people do not need to wear them.
It recommends only people with the coronavirus symptoms wear a mask, not the healthy people trying to prevent themselves from getting.
There's no reason to be walking around with a mask. When you're in the middle of an outbreak, wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better. And
masking, wearing 2 masks.
I mean, this is a physical covering to prevent droplets and virus to get in. So you want it to fit better. So one of the ways you could do it, if you would like to, is put a cloth mask on.
Number 6 is loading the language. This is a tactic that's used to create thought-terminating cliches, thought stoppers. Often repetitive terms, names, or phrases that will describe a group of people or a certain thought process or a certain way of being, and it's used to stigmatize certain things so that when the person hears these words, that they immediately come to a conclusion without processing information. It can also be used to discourage a person from certain types of beliefs or questions. It will have a broad meaning, so all these types of behaviors are all associated with this type of person or this word. That makes a person not want to be labeled that term, so it discourages them from any of those behaviors or ideas.
The person who they say is responsible for this perhaps believed in several conspiracy theories.
Misinformation.
Misinformation.
Fake news.
Anti-mask, anti-vaccination.
Misinformation.
Anti-vaccination.
The anti-vax.
The conspiracy theory.
Number 7 is doctrine over person. This can happen when a person's experiences don't align with the narrative given to them by the group. It causes conflict in a person because what they have experienced and what they're seeing happening to them is not exactly what they're being told is happening to them. It doesn't align. They are living in a world that has looked one way to them, but then they're told the truth is that it's the opposite way. So it creates an inner conflict with how they see the world and how they're actually experiencing it. It can cause them to even create situations, maybe unconsciously create situations that confirm what they're being told about the world because their real experiences have not been consistent with the narrative.
Trump came to the political fore on a platform of pure, uncut white supremacy. That what he does is he puts what I call another kilo of pure, uncut white supremacy on the table for his followers to snort up.
Neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. It has no place in America. Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear.
Investigators say they're treating the reported attack as a possible hate crime.
Team sources close to the brothers who were once considered suspects were hired by Jesse to stage the attack, and even stated that the racist letter sent to the Empire set directed towards Jesse was sent by the actor himself.
Former NFL player Edon Kaufman has been charged with staging a fake hate crime. A
group of 3 men wrote the initials KKK and a racial slur on the hood of her car. Police just announced that the story was fabricated and that the burns were self-inflicted.
Black dude fabricates white America hate crime.
More than 100 publicized incidents of so-called hate, Riley says. From his findings, 40% of hate crimes reported turn out to be fake.
Lastly, number 8 is the dispensing of existence. This is an all or nothing. You must follow our rules or you will cease to exist, or something bad will happen to you. It's used to manipulate the person into following the rules using fear. Anybody outside of the group is going to perish because they didn't do what we said. It's a really effective way of keeping somebody in line.
Angela says because of misinformation, she decided to not get herself or her daughter Kaya vaccinated.
I just had a false sense of...
John refused to take the vaccine. It was his last regret.
He regrets not speaking with his doctor. He regrets not getting the vaccine.
One of his last texts to his fiance was, "I should have gotten the damn vaccine."
Cases of COVID in Israel are about 84% with vaccinated individuals. It's certainly looking like the Pfizer vaccine is not working against the Delta variant. Now, that's not being talked about here in U.S. media. We need to get to the truth. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical researcher, but I have all kinds of questions that are not getting answered. And as I said before, none of this is making sense.